"We haven't eaten in 5 days," the widow whispered. The rancher handed her bread and his last name. Rain rolled across the Wyoming plains like a curtain falling over the world, turning the dirt road into a ribbon of mud as Jacob Holt guided his horse toward the abandoned trail he rarely used anymore. He wasn't supposed to ride that way today. In fact, he had planned to stay at the ranch and fix the southern fence before winter swallowed the land whole. But something, an instinct he couldn't explain, pulled him toward the old river crossing where the cliffs stood like silent watchers, where storms always gathered first. Jacob urged the horse forward, half blinded by sheets of cold rain, and that was when he saw it, a broken wagon tilted in the mud, a wheel snapped in half, and beside it, a woman clutching 2 children against her chest as though the wind might blow them away. Her dress was soaked through, her hair plastered to her cheeks, but it was her eyes, hollow, trembling, fierce with the last spark of motherly strength, that froze Jacob's breath in his lungs. He swung down from his horse, boots splashing, and lifted a hand gently. "Mom, are you hurt?" For a moment, the woman didn't answer. She seemed caught between courage and collapse. Finally her lips parted, her voice barely a ghost. "We haven't eaten in 5 days." The whisper wasn't dramatic. It wasn't meant to move anyone. It was simply truth, raw and fragile. The 2 children, maybe 6 and 8, shivered violently under the thin blanket wrapped around their shoulders. Jacob's heart clenched as he realized the blanket was the woman's coat, torn apart and shared between her babies. His throat tightened. Without a word, he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a wrapped loaf of bread he had packed for his ride. The widow blinked at it as though she couldn't believe food could be real. Jacob knelt, breaking off soft pieces and offering them first to the children, who devoured them with desperate, trembling hands. When he held the last chunk out to the mother, she shook her head. "Give it to them." Jacob didn't let her refuse. He pressed it gently into her fingers. "Mom, you're shaking worse than they are. Eat." Her lips quivered, not from hunger alone but from the shock of someone insisting she mattered too. She ate slowly, as though her body wasn't ready to trust the idea of food. Jacob slipped off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders despite her weak protest. "You'll freeze." She looked away, ashamed. "You shouldn't waste your kindness on us, sir. We're just passing through." "Not like this you're not," Jacob answered firmly. His ranch wasn't far. 2 miles if you rode fast, 20 minutes if you walked, and he could see the woman was at the edge of collapse. When he learned she was a widow named Clara, traveling west after losing her husband to pneumonia and her farm to debt collectors, something inside him bent until it nearly broke. He lifted both children onto his horse and offered Clara his arm. "Come on, I'll get you someplace warm." She hesitated, pride warring with desperation, but the rain made the decision for her. She took his hand. At the Holt Ranch, the house was warm, filled with the smell of stew and wood smoke. Jacob's sister, Martha, a tough ranch woman with a soft heart, rushed to bundle the children in blankets and sit them by the fire. Clara stood awkwardly near the door, as though afraid stepping further inside might be a sin. Jacob guided her to a chair. "Sit, please, you're safe here." When she finally lowered herself, her legs buckled and the weight of every mile she had walked seemed to crash through her. Martha brought a bowl of stew, and Clara tried to eat slowly but couldn't. Her body betrayed her hunger. Tears fell silently down her cheeks as she spooned warm broth into her mouth. "Thank you," she choked. "I didn't know people like you still existed." Jacob looked at her children asleep on the rug, then back at Clara, whose exhaustion made her look far older than her 28 years. "People like us," he said quietly. "Mom, you survived things that would break most folks. You're stronger than you think." That night, after Clara and the children had eaten and fallen asleep in the guest room, Jacob sat by the fire thinking of them. He thought of how empty the ranch had felt since his parents died, how quiet evenings had become a strange form of loneliness he'd never admitted aloud. And he thought of Clara whispering, "We haven't eaten in 5 days," with the hollow weight of someone who had carried her suffering alone for too long. Something inside him, something gentle, unfamiliar, shifted. Over the next days, Clara regained her strength. Her children, Lily and Owen, ran through the fields laughing for the first time in months. Clara worked hard, mending clothes, cooking, helping Martha with chores even though no one asked her to. She was humble, grateful, and strong in a way that left Jacob constantly struck by admiration. And as days passed, Jacob found himself inventing excuses to talk to her, show her the horses, teach her children how to ride, walk with her to the barn just to hear her voice. Clara, too, felt something stirring in her chest, but she hid it behind politeness, behind fear of hoping for anything again. One evening, as the sun dipped red behind the hills, Jacob found Clara folding laundry on the porch. Her children had fallen asleep inside after chasing fireflies. Clara looked up as Jacob approached, and in her eyes he saw a softness that both warmed and scared him. "Can I ask you something?" he said quietly. She nodded. "When you said you hadn't eaten in 5 days, why keep going west? Why keep walking when most people would have stopped?" Clara looked toward the dark horizon. "Because stopping meant giving up. And my babies, they deserve a chance at life. I would walk across the whole world barefoot if it meant keeping them alive." Jacob swallowed hard. "Clara, you don't have to walk anymore." She blinked. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer at first. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out the small silver ring that had belonged to his mother. Clara's breath hitched. Jacob's voice shook slightly. "I want you to stay. You and the children. Not out of charity. Not because I pity you. But because I care for you. More than I ever expected to care for anyone again. Clara, I'm offering you a home. A family. My name." She stared at him, stunned. Tears flooded her eyes. Not the hopeless kind from that day on the road, but the kind that bloom from being seen, chosen, cherished. "Jacob, I don't deserve." "Yes," he said, stepping closer, "you do." The porch light flickered gently between them as Clara finally let years of pain slip from her shoulders. She nodded, trembling. "Then, yes, I'll be your wife." Jacob pulled her into his arms as her tears soaked into his shirt. For the first time in years, Clara felt safe enough to cry. And for the first time since he'd lost everything he loved, Jacob's heart felt full again. The wind carried their promise across the ranch like a blessing. And the next morning, when Lily and Owen woke to find Jacob preparing pancakes with a huge smile, they giggled and called him Papa, without even thinking, because deep down, they already knew. They had finally found home. Their wedding was small, just the ranch hands, Martha, the preacher from town, and Clara's 2 children dressed in freshly washed clothes. But to Jacob Holt, it felt grander than any celebration he had ever known. The ceremony took place beneath the old cottonwood tree near the creek, a place where the wind sounded like music and sunlight sifted through the leaves like blessing after blessing. When Clara walked toward him wearing a simple white dress Martha had sewn overnight and Lily carrying a bouquet of prairie flowers, Jacob felt his breath leave his body entirely. She wasn't the desperate, starving widow he had found shivering in the rain. She was radiant, alive, reborn by hope. Clara's hands trembled as she placed them in Jacob's, not from fear but from the overwhelming weight of receiving something she never dreamed she would again, a future filled with love. The preacher's voice faded into the breeze as Jacob slid the silver ring onto Clara's finger, and when he lifted her chin and kissed her softly, the children cheered, and even the horses in the distance seemed to neigh in celebration. After the wedding feast, simple stew, warm bread, and peach pie, Clara tucked her children into bed, and Jacob found her standing on the porch, watching the stars glow like lanterns across the sky. He stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Still with me?" he teased gently. She leaned into him, a soft smile forming. "I still can't believe any of this is real." Jacob rested his chin on her shoulder. "Believe it. Clara Holt is real." Hearing her new name sent a shiver through her, a mixture of joy and disbelief. She turned in his arms, studying his face. "Jacob, thank you. For saving us. You saved me, too, he said quietly. Clara touched his cheek. How? By giving this ranch, and me, something to live for again. From that night on, the Holt Ranch transformed, not because of new buildings or new land, but because laughter returned to it. Lily's giggles echoed across the barn as she learned to brush the horses. Owen followed Jacob everywhere, mimicking the way he walked, stood, and even tipped his hat. He worships you, Clara whispered one evening while watching them mend a fence together. Jacob shook his head. I worship him. He's tougher than most grown men I know. Clara smiled softly. He got that from his father. Jacob turned to her with gentle eyes. He has two fathers now. One in heaven, one here. Her throat tightened with emotion. Jacob. He pulled her hand to his chest. Clara, your past isn't something you owe apologies for. You loved a good man. You lost him. That doesn't make loving again wrong. It makes it brave. Clara rested her head on his shoulder. Then I guess I'm braver than I thought. But life, especially ranch life, wasn't all sweetness and soft moments. Winter storms came early and fierce that year. One night, a blizzard howled so violently that the barn roof nearly ripped off, and Jacob had to fight against the wind to save the livestock while Clara kept the children safe inside. Jacob returned hours later, frozen, exhausted, half collapsed, and Clara dropped to her knees, pulling him into her arms. Jacob, you could have died out there. Not with you waiting for me, he rasped. She wrapped him in blankets, her hands trembling as she warmed his face by the fire. Jacob cupped her cheek even in his weakness. As long as you're with me, Clara, I'll always come home. Snowstorms passed, and spring brought new life. A year after their wedding, Clara stood on that same porch, one hand resting on her growing belly, watching Jacob teach Lily and Owen how to rope a dummy steer. The children's laughter floated across the ranch like music. Jacob caught Clara's eye and smiled, the kind of smile that held gratitude, pride, and a love deeper than words. Clara whispered to herself, thank you for all of this. When Jacob joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, she placed his hand on her stomach. His eyes widened with wonder every time, even though he'd felt the baby kick many times before. Another Holt on the way, he murmured. This ranch is going to be full of little boots. Clara laughed, wiping tears from her cheeks. I never imagined I'd have more children, or more love. You deserve it all, he said. But life had one more test in store. Late that fall, Clara's old wagon, the same one that had broken in the storm months ago, was found near the road with several men searching through it. Thieves. The same ones who had followed her west, the ones who blamed her husband for debts he never owed. Jacob confronted them with the quiet, deadly calm of a man protecting everything he loved. You're not taking anything from this family, he said. The men laughed until they saw the resolve in his eyes, then they turned mean. A fight broke out, brutal and muddy. Clara ran from the house, shouting Jacob's name as the children cried behind her. When she saw one of the men lift a knife, she screamed, but Jacob fought with the strength of someone who refused to be separated from the people he loved ever again. By the time the sheriff arrived, the thieves were subdued, Jacob was bruised and bleeding, and Clara was holding him, sobbing into his shoulder. I can't lose you, she cried. Not you too. Jacob pressed his forehead to hers. You won't, I promise. That night, as Clara cleaned his wounds, tears dripping onto his skin, Jacob took her hand and whispered, Clara, no one will ever hurt you again. Not while I breathe. She kissed his hand, trembling. And no one will ever take your name from me. Months passed, and peace returned to the ranch. When Clara gave birth to their daughter, a tiny, rosy-cheeked miracle named Hope, Jacob held her as though she were made of sunlight. Lily and Owen crowded around, whispering promises to protect their baby sister. Clara leaned back against the pillows, exhausted but glowing. Jacob kissed her forehead and whispered, You saved me the day you whispered the truth in the rain. I didn't know I needed a family, until you became mine. Clara smiled weakly. And I didn't know kindness still existed, until you handed me bread. Bread was the first thing, Jacob said softly, but my last name was everything else. Their daughter cooed gently, and the warm glow of the fire filled the room with peace. Jacob wrapped his arms around his wife and all 3 children, one born of her past, one born of their present, and one born of their future. They were a family built from broken roads, starvation, storms, and miracles. A family built because one widow whispered her truth, and one rancher listened with his whole heart. And so, the Holt Ranch became known across the county not just for its strong horses or sturdy fences, but for the love that lived there, love strong enough to resurrect a woman's hope, mend a man's loneliness, and give 3 children a future brighter than the morning sun rising over the Wyoming hills. And if you're watching this story unfold, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because more powerful, emotional stories like this are waiting just for you.